Good morning, everyone. Daniel Breton here from Electric Mobility Canada. We are with our fourth panelist, Brian Masse from the NDP. He is the MP from Windsor West, the riding in Ontario. He's a spokesperson for innovation, science, economic development, and auto industry. Mr. Masse, nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Could you give us a bit of a sense about what the NDP has in mind for electric mobility?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank Electric Mobility Canada for doing this, and also for your advocacy on the Hill. With great challenges also, kind of creates great opportunity. And I think that your diverse group of representation is really representative of what we believe as New Democrats with Jagmeet Singh, in that we want to see change, everything from the shop floor to the showroom when it comes to electric mobility devices and how they actually work amongst our communities, everywhere from the federal level down to even the municipal level, because there's exciting opportunities that come with this change. And I think back to the days when I worked in Plant 3 and Plant 6 for Chrysler in Windsor, Ontario here, where, when I toured the plant last, you can barely recognize the inside of it with the modernization that's taken place, the design development, the new products that have come online. It's quite exciting, but the reality is that Canada is not taking its rightful place with regards to manufacturing and producing many of the electric mobility devices that are going to dominate the future. And this missed opportunity is really evident where I'm from in Windsor, Ontario, where across the river from here is Detroit, Michigan, which has received over $10 billion alone in the Michigan-Detroit area on new innovation and investment for electric vehicle manufacturing. That pales in comparison to all of Canada, where we've just seen some refurbishment, but we still haven't even seen some new plant development, and we're losing our automotive footprint. And I would argue we're also losing opportunities for other electric mobility devices because of the potential for transferable technology, patent development that actually leads to manufacturing capacity. These are things that we need to seize upon now. The NDP first launched its green auto strategy back in 2004 with Jack Layton and David Suzuki, seeking to move to a greener economy for our cars, recognizing that there's not only just the electrification of it, but also lowering weights, improving safety standards, and a series of things that would expand the duration a vehicle can actually go, and other types of electric products that actually could be on the market. I actually even showed Who Killed the Electric Car as a movie in my riding as General Motors sunsetted from here, a number of years ago, 100 years, and then actually closing down in Windsor. But I showed that movie to show that there's other opportunities out there if we have a bold vision. So for this election and the past, I'll say that, again, the focus for the NDP is going to be from, again, design development and the concept of how to do production, and then seeing that to the shop floor to be exporters. We've seen in the past, our country can punch above its weight for manufacturing. This is a serious opportunity from every products that you could think about that move people, but also too, I would argue about how we live our lifestyles in our own houses and apartments, and as well our municipal urban areas. So I'll cease there just by saying thank you very much for this opportunity to have a broader discussion. I know we're going to get into some specific questions, and encourage those if they do have their own questions to ask me, because I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks a lot. Very interesting. I actually used to work in the assembly plant at GM in Sainte Thérèse when I was a student.
Yes, that was one of the last ones that we lost. And it's a good example, though, of not getting the proper product to actually replace that. And we have that same dilemma taking place with regards to some of our current auto assembly plants, Bramalea, Brampton right now as an example. But at any rate, I'll cease there.
Okay. Well, let's go with the questions then. So our first question that we sent you is very simple. Is the NDP in favor of the creation and deployment of a comprehensive Canadian electric mobility strategy that includes a ZEV supply chain strategy in order to create sustainable, high-paying, high-quality Canadian jobs across the country?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have had a national auto strategy that has been part and center of our party's platform for many years, actually supported and really, worked with Unifor going back so I know over a decade to 2 decades, actually, since I've been a member of parliament since 19 years, because we believe that we have to set targets similar to our emissions in this country, not meeting emission targets and not meeting the deadlines that we even set. We believe that meeting standards for employment, for investment, for research and development are critical measurables to see if we're doing things properly. We used to actually have a serious automotive strategy at one point in time, at least that would measure some of these things, everything from improving infrastructure to innovation, to even actually on the commercial side in the job areas that were so important. But that has actually gone over the last number of years. And in fact, the Liberals have actually been, when they have had meetings for Canadian manufacturing, they've actually even done it in the United States. It hasn't always even been in Canada because the auto show is in Detroit, and sometimes they'd have the meetings in Detroit. So this has got to change, and getting those measurables will be critical. I'd also argue that transitions for the workers are really important. In fact, right now, lift workers have been kind of left to their own. So we don't have a particular strategy. We go from crisis to crisis, and that's one of the things that has to change. So there needs to be more incentives for training. And I think that's where the public really sees this end of the supports that they would see palatable for them, is doing large corporate tax reductions has not worked. We have witnessed our decline in the auto industry from the amount of vehicles that we've actually been producing, but also the amount of investment that's taken place. What we should be doing is more along the carrot and stick approach and using the public investments of training, ensuring, say, for example, healthcare benefits lower the costs, but those controllables go back to the actual workers in the workplace. They also provide the opportunity to be much more competitive when we've seen in my neck of the woods, even the United States and Mexico offer incentives that are quite dramatic. So these are the things that we would put together. And again, it would be comprehensive. So I mentioned with regards to automotive, but this would be more comprehensive because we have a manufacturing strategy that also includes transit and other electric mobility devices, which are becoming popular, like even scooters right now. We're seeing a lot of different fun stuff, quite frankly, for people to actually get engaged in and be participants in electric devices than ever before. And that's a great opportunity, especially for young people.
Just so you know, in a few days, actually, electric mobility will be part of an announcement on the creation of a new Canadian ZEV supply chain organization called the Accelerate Alliance. So when that's done, we will tell you about this because we think that there's a great opportunity here.
Oh, absolutely.
Second question, do you have a plan to develop and ensure Canadian access to strategic minerals in an environmentally respectful way? I don't know if you know about this, but for now, 99% of the lithium that's being extracted in Canada goes outside the country, namely in China.
Yeah, and that's part of our, sadly, our tradition right now is to rip and ship. And I would just take a look at the softwood lumber industry. I was part of delegations to push back on the United States with regards to that, and we've seen the value added component leave, and we have to stop that. It's absolutely unconscionable for Canada to continue to not have value-added strategies, especially when countries like the United States, even despite us signing agreements, are putting in Buy America, Buy American, and also the Jones Act and series of other type of barriers that prevent us from competing fairly in many respects. And I would also argue we have a duty, first of all, with Aboriginal consultation. Many of these minerals lie within their jurisdiction and their areas. And there's quite a debate about whether they want to participate in these processes or not. So we have to respect that from the first point before we even get out of the door, because if we don't show that, then we won't have the proper dialogue. And that's why the NDP has called for this to be part of actually the discussions at the forefront, because if not, then we're going to create quite a problem later on. And I would argue again that when you look at steel, when you look at the way that we actually do the types of mining and we do the type of operations, we have lower greenhouse gas emissions than many other countries, and we should be putting that in the actual process. So if you remember, it was New Democrats that fought to have labor and environmental standards put in the new NAFTA. And it was the Trudeau Liberals that actually opposed that at first. And why Mexico actually even signed before Canada is because they actually included those components. And we had a change coming in late to include those measurables as a trade agreement. We believe that's to advantage of Canada. And again, I would argue that the rip and ship philosophy that we have is disingenuous to the communities that actually have these materials. It takes away from the advantages, and it also creates more transportation logistic issues that we don't need.
Okay. So do you have a plan to develop value-added transformation of strategic minerals in Canada?
Yeah, so we would actually move towards using the shred tax credits and also incentives for a climate bank that would be eligible for this type of work because we have other biofuels and other types of technology that need investment other than just the traditional. Right now we're thinking battery cells and so forth. And so those incentives would be tied to that. We would end the subsidization of fossil fuels. That's one of the things we have to make some choices of where the resources are going to go for. We'd also have a cabinet committee on climate change that oversees all the government departments because this is quite a complicated issue, and it also involves policies of trade, foreign policy. Not only just that, it involves the municipalities and a whole series of just employment and training. So we would actually include that as a part of a robust strategy to deal with climate change. And again, I mean, the challenges are there, but the opportunities are unique. And I would argue when you look at the auto industry, it's almost like a platinum age. We have major investment taking place with newer technologies, and the opportunity to use transferable technology is really important as well too. So if we have government supports and subsidies, there's more cooperatives that we can do amongst universities, patents, and then also production. I come from the tool and die mold making industry in Windsor, Ontario here, and they're just ready to go. They've already done a lot of work, but having this transition and having a plan would be appropriate.
Okay. Question about light duty passenger cars. So is the NDP in favor of offering light duty electric vehicle purchase incentives?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have a plan that would have $15,000 per family. With that, there would also be other incentives for municipalities, and we'd also be looking at using this for crown corporations. This is one of the emerging markets that's also going to be complicated because it's going to challenge some of the weight distribution and power that is actually in the vehicles, and the vehicles are also going to have some difficulty with regards to the tasks that they have, but also to the environmental changes that we have with regards to a variety of different climates that we deal with. So we believe significantly important incentives have to be moving to this class because it also is some of the work that gets done in our economy, and it also has some of the greater vehicles that could be a help with. I actually led the way through a private members bill called the Right to Repair. This is for the aftermarket vehicles with regards to having them being able to have the information from the OEMs with regards to fixing vehicles, training, equipment, software, and so forth. And I would argue that this needs to be worked on in the larger class of vehicles still in the supporting vehicles. So there's a couple of things that are at risk here. And as we move forward, we have to make sure that's all put together.
I look, when you talk about $15,000 per family, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's going to be different families and different vehicles that are out there. And we've seen in the past disastrous programs that have been put forth by both the Conservatives and the Liberals. And I'll give two examples. If you remember, the Stephen Harper Conservatives had the Eco Auto Febate. And that was a program over $100 million where the lion's share, I think it was 91 million, actually went to the Yaris because they actually took out the side airbags to reduce the vehicle weight. So it made the actual categorization to actually be sold and get the rebate. So you have to be careful about that. And then second of all, most recently, we saw with the federal Liberals, when they put in their program for incentives, it was $5,000, but they left the Chrysler Pacifica out. And that was the only Canadian-made manufactured vehicle that's multi-passenger. We had to fight to get that included as a Unifor vehicle as well too, and it's domestically produced. And some of the research was done quite significantly in this country, and it was left out. So for the $15,000, we would rather have it be a little more flexible, and it also would include the opportunity because not everybody wants to buy a car. So some are looking at electric bicycles, some are looking at electric scooters. There's, as we talked about, moving towards trucks, and there's cars, and we would focus on domestic production and have a sliding scale based upon that, and focus on the family unit, because some families will be in different purchase categories than others.
Okay, so let's say a family wants to buy 2 electric cars. The $15,000 would be split in two. Is that it?
Yeah, you would have that as a starting point to do that. We'd also waive the HST. That's another easily controllable one that we can do. And then we have other incentives for, say, for example, I know some of the questions will touch on this later on, for home and other types of infrastructure for charging and so forth, to lessen the costs for that. So again, one of the challenges when you're doing heavy incentives to move and transition economy is making sure that the public supports that investment. Why I like a lot of the ideas that EMC has, is because they're controllables, where the money that we invest goes back into our communities, or it goes to basically supporting Canadian consumers, as opposed to having just a large corporate tax cut reduction that doesn't guarantee the investment takes place in Canada. Or we have research and development that doesn't often lead to some of the production here as well too, which we have to change as well, but it's not worth giving up on right now. But at the same time, our lower hanging fruit is getting more people supports right now. And I know they support that controllable, because they see that as a stimulus to the economy. So that's why we would go with a platform like that. And then again, making sure that most people could actually take advantage of those programs, so we don't leave people out and have a divided society that feels like some are just doing better than others. And especially if we had high incentives for luxury vehicles, but not for other smaller passenger vehicles, and the minivan, as I suggested, which is a multi-passenger vehicle.
Okay. And are you in favor of offering specific EV purchase incentive for lower income citizens or families?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to there, and making sure that inclusive element is there. And that's actually about environmental justice as well too. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure that Canadians feel that they can participate in this, because if we're basically going to have a program and that's heavy incentivized for the $150,000 vehicle versus that of the $60,000 to $70,000 vehicle, or are not having incentives at all for other types of electric mobility devices, then we're going to isolate pockets and populations. So we have to actually have that, and that's where sliding scale can come in as well too, for the incentive, depending upon the income of the persons that are involved, and why we're not going to just limit it to one vehicle. We're going to have it per family, because we believe that's a more robust strategy.
And a family would be 2 adults and kids. Is that it?
Well, we have to work on those definitions. It's more for taxation is where we'd probably fall in the family, and the family unit is still a very much a changing thing. I mean, you talk to young people and but it would be more inclusive than it would be exclusive. So we have to be open to different family models for sure, because that's the way society is right now, and it's moved to. And again, this is about an inclusionary process, again, because environmental justice is about keeping people that want to see climate change take place, but not also isolated from it because of their income or their, I guess, lack of connection in the political system that has left them absent from some of those programs. And that's why when you have that type of program versus tax rebates, is that they don't often cover a lot of people. So if you actually have tax write-offs for some people, they may not actually make the money necessary to qualify and get the rebate back. So that's why we actually have to have a model that's different.
Okay. On that topic, are you in favor of offering used electric vehicle purchase incentives?
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be some challenges with battery replacements. We will have some vehicles that will undoubtedly have some major advantages because they use less oil, and they use less liquids, and they use less intensive materials for the production of greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, they're going to have some other challenges as they age. And so we want to make sure that those vehicles remain on the road longer. And that's why I referred to my right to repair bill, because Tesla right now does not provide a buy-in to the system. So I tried to get a system that was based in the United States that was brought through by the EPA, enforces it in terms of providing that materials, providing the information, and even software, where some of the large manufacturing weren't providing flash updates on software, which takes a moment to fix cars. And so we have cars on the road that were longer for needing a repair. They weren't operating as best efficiently as they could. There's a lot of different issues, public safety, and we were being treated different than the United States. So what we got was a voluntary agreement. And so it's kind of like we got a field goal instead of a touchdown. But the problem is it's not forcible enough. So we have to modernize it a little bit. And then Tesla, for example, has not signed on to that. So we have to make sure our used fleets that are going to start to come up a little bit right now are going to be still operable, and people are still going to be able to find them affordable enough to keep them on the road, especially if they're actually going to continue to reduce emissions.
Okay. I think you touched on that, but I will ask the question anyway. Is the NDP in favor of HST exemption or adjustment for the purchase of light-duty electric vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's another controllable that's easy for it. In fact, actually, I was opposed to the HST as well because I feel it's a regressive tax. But and actually, it was under the Harper administration. We actually borrowed money because we gave money to Ontario and BC to actually, during a deficit, to actually bring in the HST. But that's a side story. So at any rate, so it's easy for me to waive the HST on that. And I think that most people support that as a public policy in general, if we're actually saying that we want to do things. So this is really about kind of creating jobs, getting better products into the market that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, cleaning the air, having an opportunity for everybody to participate and be engaged. Yes, if there is a higher price on it, you're going to get a better rebate, but at least with the HST removal, again, it will allow everybody to participate in that benefit. And that's a controllable, again, that we can have right away. And I think people feel better about that. And again, that's where you want to build some support, because again, if we do this without economic and social justice, then we're going to separate our pockets and population of winners and losers in this. And that's not going to be good for actually even stimulating the excitement that electric vehicles and products kind of bring to changing lifestyles. So I see that as one of the easier hanging fruits that we can do and controllable that can be done right away.
Okay. A bit of a longer question this time. Is the NDP in favor of a fiscally neutral fee-based system that help accelerate the transition towards greener vehicles? A fee-based system, for those who don't know or are not aware of it, means that there is a fee for gas guzzlers that finances EV rebates, so the system pays for itself. It may include exemptions for people who need bigger vehicles that are not yet available in electric version for big families, workers, or farmers.
Yeah, so that's one of the ones that we're not as supportive of, be quite frank and direct on it. We're not opposed to it in many respects, but we rather move the money towards incentives at this particular point as opposed to penalties. I think, though, there's a great point that you've made with regards to farmers and also those that are in the economy, small manufacturers, and also the service vehicles that are out there that needs to be looked at. But we would focus mostly on the incentive model and putting the money towards that versus out of the penalty model. But again, it's not something that we would dismiss outright, but at the same time, we would look strongly towards the categorization as how those elements affect also businesses and how they can compete and transition. Our preference is to go to the incentive side. I've seen better results for that myself. There's also, incentives that have done in the past to retire vehicles quicker and so forth, like Car Heaven from General Motors and so forth.
Scrap it programs.
Scrap it programs. Again, our focus for the economic stimulus would be towards actually incentivizing people to transition. But those programs have merit. There's no doubt, and they're worth discussing. Right now, we've kind of captured and moved because we want to have a positive conversation of getting newer vehicles and also people participating in the economy through a more of a positive approach. Not the saying that's all negative. It's just the way that it comes across as more of a penalty model than it does as an incentive model.
Okay. Let's go to the medium and heavy duty sector now. Is the NDP in favor of offering medium and heavy duty electric vehicles purchase incentives?
Yeah, we stick with our consistency with regards to $15,000 per vehicle, and that's where our per family. And that would also allow us to actually move into electric vehicles and buses for municipalities. So we've announced money and funding for those elements and improving the traditional, gas tax, so forth, to the municipalities for those types of projects. Those are also the vehicles that could be parts of fleets and other types of initiatives for crown corporations, provincial and municipal. So they're one of the more emerging issues with regards to how do we support getting those vehicles manufactured in Canada, because we are a traditional struggle to do so to begin with, And then second of all, how the incentives would roll out. So I also see this as an exciting opportunity because we look at transport trucks and how they're moving into cleaner technologies, and also how they're actually going to be significant improvements to step forward. I think we should be participating with that. And there's also marine transportation. I didn't touch on that a little bit as well too. We have a lot of our Great Lakes ships and shipping industry that's quite outdated and that's going through quite a renovation in many respects with upgrading. So those are issues that could use a little bit more detailed attention in the future.
Okay, if I look at your program, your platform here, it says here that you want to ensure that federal transit funding flows with emphasis on scaling up low carbon transit projects like zero emission buses and electric trains, with the goal of electrifying transit and other municipal fleets by 2030. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, that's similar, consistent to also our 2035 for vehicle production and purchasing, is to move that to 2035. So the municipalities, we have a lot of fleets that need to be sunsetted. They're aged. I'm a former city councillor, and I can tell you one of the hardest things to get has been the funding for these types of operations, which can take decades to pay off, depending upon the financing model. So we want to move more incentives to that. That's why we want to increase the funding of the traditional gas tax, and also get the fleets out there, because part of this is, and I would want to give a tip of the hat to Canada Post workers. They put together quite a robust strategy that uses public assets to actually improve the situation. So they're talking about charging stations, and for heaven's sake, they recently had their fleets changed. I think about 10 years ago. I'm just going off the top of my head, and where we bought vehicles from Turkey. Where we should be looking at fleet development and purchasing from Canada that is part of a larger procurement. So with that, with public transportation, obviously is key to moving people, but also too is getting those electric vehicles in your daily life. And then also people seeing them around them and in their neighborhoods. Nothing's worse than waiting for a bus and then getting actually the smog, the congestion, the oil, the gas, everything on a hot day as you're burning up on the bus stop. Whereas having actually cleaner technology, people take more of a sense of pride for it. And I think it's been great for municipalities. In fact, it leaves people with a little bit of empowerment, and they feel stronger about how we can make local decisions work for themselves that actually have national repercussions.
Okay. Are there any other policies or programs that you support to accelerate the deployment of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles, such as financing support from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, infrastructure installation support, bulk buy, or anything else?
Yeah, so bulk buy is there. Also, a climate change bank is another one that we want to bring forth that's more specific for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We continue to miss our targets. We don't even meet Stephen Harper's targets currently right now. So that's got to change. And so we would be looking for those types of incentives. I would also argue too, which I'm not sure that there's a lot of enough attention paid to this, but I in the past have been a big proponent for the capital cost reduction allowance, and also too been a big proponent for reforming our SR&ED tax credits, especially for small and medium-sized businesses for innovation. We've almost created a cottage industry for smaller and medium-sized businesses that actually have to hire consultants to apply for the tax credit for research and development. Whereas I'd rather see that to be an easier process for those companies to go through, and less having to pay for people to fill out paperwork and losing a percentage of that. And then having more commitments for manufacturing and production in our communities with a connection to some of our universities and that. So I think there's some unique opportunities to do some different things. It's going to take some more consultation. It's going to take some more work on how to actually bring those things. But again, that's why we talk about a national auto strategy and a national manufacturing strategy where we actually have measurables. So when we see that if we're meeting those measurables, we're doing good. If we don't, then we have a problem that have to adjust. And that's kind of how we did it before. It was through a red light, amber light, and a green light system of measuring how we were doing. And we've gotten away from that. And that's really been a disadvantage from my perspective, because we can actually zero in on issues, and we haven't even touched. There's emerging technologies in aerospace and other things like that, but all kinds of small pocket innovation is taking place. I want to see us capitalize on it again, from the shop floor to the showroom.
Okay. And talking about micro and off-road electric mobility, are you in favor of offering purchase incentives for bikes, scooters, motorcycles, electric snowmobiles, recreational boats?
Oh, absolutely. I would even say you have to look at yard equipment and stuff like that. I mean, we have so many different combustible engines that are inefficient at some of the smaller products that we have.
High polluters too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some of them are worse than cars, and
Yeah.
you know, and what we want to do is get reductions in emissions down, and these are also things that, I mean, they may seem, when you think about some of the products, that they're maybe more fun oriented than actually work related in terms of a society, but they're also part of our daily lives that helps bridge the gap between the way to get there. And I see this as an incredible opportunity. That's why I've talked about transferable technologies and expectations. Down in Windsor here, Ontario, we have a new electric scooter rental facility on our waterfront. More people have actually been using the electric scooters. And I will give them credit. It's Bird as the product that has been used down here. And I'll walk on my waterfront all the time. I haven't used the scooter yet because I'm this big walker, but I've seen more kids and more adults and more people ever than before using our public space and domains with that and experiencing our waterfront, which goes along 6 kilometers than ever before. And these are things that make people associate the actual practical element of going out and doing and understanding that electrification of mobility devices are actually real. It's not just a wheelchair or a car. They're actually things that actually can be fun in our lifestyles and are also fun in our environment that create a difference. And when you look at some of the old, I guess bikes that were motorized and some of the other things, I mean, they're quite, polluter intensive. Same with scooters and other things of that nature. And we've got to change this around. And these are also fun opportunities to introduce new products to people. And I want to have us build those products here. I think that's where we have to really focus and, again, zero in on a strategy to do so.
Yep. Let's talk about infrastructure now. Is the NDP in favor of rebates for the purchase of electric vehicle chargers in existing residential or commercial buildings and workplaces, like single-family homes or multi-unit residential or commercial or workplaces?
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the one thing that we do have to make sure, though those incentives are going to be passing the costs on to the consumers. In the past, we've had some of those programs where there hasn't been accountability of the costing of it. And so they've actually been built into the cost when people have put them into their housing and so forth. And so that has to be watched, is that how we do it. But I'm a huge proponent of this because you see in California and other places where they're actually using their charging at home to put power back into the grid and making money off of it. I mean, from their own vehicle. So there are some exciting opportunities here. I'm a big proponent of including that as part of the building code. I think that's where we have to have some incentives, though, to make sure that there's going to be the opportunity to actually green the home. And part of that would actually have the charging capacity. With that, we have to look at some standardization, though, that's taking place, because some of the charging components and infrastructure we have is not consistent like other countries have had. And that, is going to be something, because we don't want to have continual adapters across the entire country and battles with producers and suppliers, who's going to use whom's charger. That's why I like the Canada Postal Workers Union's proposal to make charging stations in our Canada Post facilities. We should be keeping them regardless, but it's just another example. They should be also a banking and also a transportation hub, and also for telecoms, for your communication as well too, because we can lower prices with all those things, and we have the land to do it, so we don't have that expense to come up with. Because if we don't have charging stations, like what's good on the 401 if you actually have to wait like 45 minutes to 2 hours just to be able to plug in? And we know that right now the plugging capacity is quicker for the recharge to get to a certain point, then it slows down. So if you're actually not able to travel and charge your car appropriately, you're not going to make the decision that you might want to have with regards to electric vehicle purchase, or you're going to be challenged to some degree. And once we build that infrastructure, it's going to be strong and stable. So again, you're talking about controllables where I think Canadians see a better tax value return for their dollar. And that's what New Democrats believe in, as opposed to just a laissez-faire, okay, we're going to reduce taxes from these companies, see what they do and hope for the best. No, put expectations and have incentives and roll out that, and it creates jobs, training, opportunity. These are all great things because they also, again, are going to lead to other opportunities as we see new emerging devices into the market. But we're going to have to really make sure that those devices are going to actually be able to be supported by the infrastructure.
How Now let's talk about installation. I'm pretty sure that you know about the fact that hundreds of thousands of Canadian houses are 40 years old or older. And when comes time for them to install an electric vehicle charger, they may have to change their whole electric panel. So is the NDP in favor of rebates for the installation of electric vehicle chargers in existing residential or commercial buildings and workplaces?
Yes, we are. And again, also waiving the HST again on those investments. But I would argue that we'd want to make sure as well when we roll this out, there's going to be high accountability to make sure that the consumers are passed on the savings, that it's not just built into putting that into your residential or your property, because that's not going to be, much of a savings if they're able to take advantage of raising the prices. So that's preparing those housing units for the next 100 years. I mean, that's what we need to have. And when you look at the price of housing right now, the cost is skyrocketing across communities like mine and other ones. You want to make sure that they're not going to continue to have infrastructure deficits on those units as we try to protect them and actually have them stay stable in the marketplace for decades to come. And some of the older ones are going to require some of those changes as well too. So I've also been a big proponent of solar, wind, and micro production at your home as part of the overall footprint of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating employment in the economy, home renovations. And we've seen in the past, some government programs, for example, were allowed to put a deck on or pave a driveway. Those things need to be re-examined. And when we look at these programs, it should be for this type of infrastructure or greenhouse gas emissions like windows and doors, and also electrical conversions to make sure that, some of those products are going to be worthwhile, because I think a lot of people are confused about how they can actually be a producer. And as I mentioned earlier, other places like California and others are using their vehicles to actually put power back into the grid. So those, there's no reason we can't have that at workforces, and there's all kinds of innovation out there that is there to do those types of things. And they all chip away at it, but they also build a better, healthy mentality for it. And that's what I kind of excited about this, is because people, once they see it's easier than you thought, then they come along.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned that, but I will ask the question anyway. Are you in favor of modernizing building codes to help accelerate EV charger installation?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I did touch on that a little bit earlier. Didn't mean to be ahead of you, Danielle, there about that. But yeah, so I'm a former city councillor, and I've just seen the way that the building code could be used healthier to allow people to actually build the facility that's going to actually lead to not only just a good house for you and your family, but also to reduction of emissions. And that's where incentives need to come in as well too. So our actually housing plan for Canadians includes some extra incentives for waiving fees and services. Some of the housing we're talking about building are greenhouses as well too. So some of the other parties talk about some of their programs, but we're talking about 500,000 homes to be built, and those would be green homes, having those types of structures. And then as well too, we want to move the mortgage rates to what our grandparents had and our parents, and that's 30 years. So you can build in some of those costs with some incentives to reduce them, so people can afford them and actually see the payback on those costs right away. And that's the key, is that with affordability issues, is that we need to see people to be able to get some of the benefits of those investments right away. Right now, some of the green incentives that you have, unfortunately, they could take a decade to pay back. And that's what we have to do, is narrow that gap so we can actually have the payback coming quicker for consumers rather than lengthier in time. So it will come back, but when it's that long out, people get a little hesitant to make that investment.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Let's talk about public charging infrastructure now. Is the NDP in favor of investing in the deployment of public level 2 charging infrastructure at 50% support, 75% support, or no, not at all? Or
yeah, we haven't come to a specific number to date, but there definitely would be incentives to do that through our climate change bank. And there's a great argument for 50%. I think 75% is part of it, but also there'll be some full ones with regards to the Canada Post, as I mentioned, with our federal different properties, and also our municipal partners and also provincial partners. So those are things that
I'm pretty sure that that right now Canada Post cannot take advantage of the federal programs regarding infrastructure.
Absolutely. No, thank you for raising that, because that's what's so bizarre about this. And it's unbelievable that we would do that, because we have land that we can control. We have employees that would benefit immediately. Then we have the general public that could go to a safe place that actually is built to actually have the public. And they're often in locations where are important for public activity to take place, whether there's other businesses or there are shops or stores, and it's absolutely absurd. So exactly, there's where we should just build them outright because we control them right away. And I think there has to be, where we're looking at, again, some uniformity about building out and expectations among the private sector as well too, because we shouldn't just be building all the charging stations for ourselves, and the private sector should also be looking at making sure that, you just can't, charge up one vehicle but nothing else, or expect people to have like 5 different adapters in their trunk to try to figure out, what they're going to be able to do, or go to a different spot. We have to get a little bit more serious about having some more uniform. And I know some of that's starting to take place. Yeah, I'm just surprised that we dropped the ball in this to begin with and are kind of fighting our way back. But I think that would be a serious thing, and that's the incentives coming in there would be scaled on that, and also where you're placing them. If you're placing them for your own set of principles and so forth and business model, that's one thing. But if you're a little more flexible and you're looking at the general public, then I think we should be more flexible in terms of incentives to make sure that the infrastructure partnership we have is solid, because that's going to be critical. Again, if people can't charge, or they have to wait long periods of time, it's going to affect how we roll this out. And the technology is going to get better. There's no doubt, but we have to do different than what we're doing now.
I'm old enough to remember the fight between Beta and VHS.
Yeah, so. Well, that's exactly it. That's 100% it. And that's the whole thing. And it's also almost like a false argument, because you really couldn't tell that much difference between the quality of what you were getting, because even your TV couldn't do the output if it didn't have the right cords. So here's the thing, is that we just need to have the proper charging stations in place for simple, straightforward, and you not have a bag of adapters trying to figure out what the heck you got to do, or go to some other place because you're not sure about that charging space, especially if we're going to actually have people travel in longer distances, where it's scary enough sometimes trying to figure out where to go to actually get the proper supports, or if you have a breakdown or you're not new to the area. Canadians are beautiful, wonderful, sharing people that always help out, but it's a little bit more stressful when you're trying to find particular destinations, especially if you're unlimited type of, power to get there. So we need to actually, take that off the actual equation of being stressed out about, just transferring technology, because you want people to be able to experience those things, and you want people to be able to feel confident when they make that product purchase, that they're going to actually be able to use the vehicle and use the experience of traveling to their benefit for them and their family without having that stress model.
Actually, about that, is the NDP in favor of investing in the deployment of public fast and super fast chargers for that reason, for traveling, but for downtown areas as well, where people, let's say they live, on the 5th floor of a high-rise building and they don't have a charger in their own parking lot. So we think that it's something very important to have fast chargers as well in downtown areas and highways. So do you have a policy? Do you have a program?
It's the same thing. We support that, and that would be part of all as we roll out the different regional, types of devices that would be necessary to be there and the incentives for it. So we wouldn't be exclusive to say that you couldn't have that. We would be inclusive to that, because you're right. It depends upon the volume of people that are actually going to be trying to use that charging station, and the vulnerability of that being overstressed versus other types of technology. So. And then they're going to change too. I mean, this is going to be the challenge that we have, is that we're going to build some infrastructure that's actually going to become outdated a little bit over time. But that's okay. We have to accept that, because this is a really special modernization time for how we're actually moving ourselves about our society. So we need to be positive about that. So that means, again, where I want consistency is being able to charge your devices amongst all the different suppliers, and incentives to actually do so that creates some type of social responsibility for it, because again, it is about social environmental justice. If you can't actually charge your vehicle properly, but you've purchased one because of the lack of infrastructure, then it becomes a big issue. And again, you're quite correct, is that there's going to be, Toronto's going to have different challenges than somewhere out in British Columbia, where it might be more rural or remote, and especially if the vehicles are different, or in Quebec, where the climate might be a little bit more challenging with regards to cold weather. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind is that flexibility will be key and critical, not to do like basically a across the board one, I guess, solution for everyone. It's got to be, that's where our partnerships for provincial jurisdictions will come in place. There needs to be some federal standards to make sure that we don't have to hop from province to province and switch your chargers and have different types of, you know, regimes in place. So there needs to be some like oversight to see at least that there was some consistency. But at the same time, we're going to have to get some advice and respect the municipalities and the provinces, because they'll be the eyes and ears on the ground as to the most effective places to put these. And again, I hate to go back again to, as an example of Canada Post to some degree, but I think at the same time, it's one of those controllables that we can do right away. And then also look for our municipal infrastructure and so forth, because now we're looking for private land. We're looking right away at public land that's controllable. And each province and municipality is going to have some opportunities to do so. And I'm sure they're going to be excited to be participants right away.
Okay. So a few more questions left. There are some questions coming in, so it's going to be a very interesting conversation with the members. Is the NDP in favor of a federal light duty zero emission vehicle mandate?
Yes, again, this is where incentives could come in to switch vehicle procurement to fleets, and as well too is that we're putting at 2035 as the time frame for electric vehicles. But if we don't have some deadlines to go after, then we're going to have some issues with regards to getting the products onto the market and so forth. And this is our challenge. That's why we want the national strategies, because we want to be part of the producers for these things as well too. So again, we've set standards before in the past for that. In fact, Canada has actually moved more in line with NHTSA in the United States over the last number of years. We actually had sometimes even had our different standards on it, but we almost just assumed their standards for some of these things. But I think we're going to have to look at this really closely. And again, I think that we want to see the incentive model as part of the process.
Okay, but what we're talking about here is regulation to ensure you were talking about 2035.
Oh,
so yeah. like what Quebec has announced, they want a ZEV mandate where 100% of vehicles sold by 2035 would be zero emission vehicle. British Columbia has announced 2040. So is that something that would be part of your platform? That
yes,
you have a ZEV mandate for 2035?
Thank you. And I didn't mean to dodge the question, but our ZEV mandate is 2035. But if, you know, this is where we're going to have to sit down with some provinces and figure out also too, some of the challenges if we have issues over production, supply and so forth. So 2035 is what we're setting out to be. But there are going to be some production issues. We've seen most recently, even here, Carsters is down again because we don't have the chips necessary, the microconductor chips. Again, we're down 2 weeks for producing electric vehicles in Windsor, Ontario.
Producing every type of vehicle, actually.
Yeah. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind as we go forward. But and again, that's why we need domestic production. And actually, I've argued before why we've allowed ourselves to be so dependent upon foreign production of materials and services is just unreal. I mean, this is part of our national strategy and our national sovereignty in many respects by allowing ourselves to be so vulnerable to trade disputes and also to lack of production. We moved to just-in-time delivery and a whole series of different operations at the bequest of companies where it's put transport trucks on the road instead of actually warehouses. And I don't want to get into the minutiae of that, but we've made ourselves so vulnerable that we actually have to do some investment. It's just unreal. It's just because the only thing that's stopping us right now is the fact that the microconductor chips are being used in other electronics right now. And the auto industry's learned that they're actually not the biggest customer when it comes to this, but this chip is the one thing that's actually derailing production of cleaner vehicles right now. That's a terrible way to approach things.
I think COVID has shed the light on that problem.
Yeah, no, I've been seeing it for a long time down here. I mean, we've seen it from bumper supply to all kinds of things in the past. But this one's been absolutely unreal. Like, again, Chrysler just announced again today here, they're down for another 2 weeks.
Okay.
You know,
so what I'm understanding is that you're in favor of a ZEV mandate for 2035. Yes. Okay.
2035. And then we're going to have to, you mentioned that British Columbia and Quebec are at different areas at this point right now. So we're going to have to work with the provinces on that. And we're also going to have to work with the issues over supply and demand.
And to make sure also, if I may say, that some regions in Canada don't end up having no supply because everything is being sent to Quebec, Ontario, and BC.
That's another terrific point. Absolutely. So a buddy of mine, he had to go to Chatham to get, I'm from Windsor, so Chatham's an hour away from here. He had to go to Chatham just to get a Ford Escort because they wouldn't sell it in Windsor because the supply was low and there wasn't the population that they felt was necessary. So he had to go an hour away to get his Ford Escort, which he loves. But, you know, having to travel an hour away because there wasn't supply here. And you're right, it's worse in other places too.
Yeah. So on the same topic of zero emission vehicle mandate, are you in favor of a federal medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle mandate, like what's being announced in California, for instance, for 2045, 2035, 2040, 2045? I don't know if you've heard about the CalStart program. So any position on that?
No, we haven't come to a final position on that, but we do want to consult to go in that direction. I think there's no doubt that if we don't, we'll be laggards with that, and that's what we don't want to be. At the same time, we want to see how this affects small, medium-sized businesses, and also about how we can actually get into supply for that. So we're definitely on board to going in that direction. But again, we have to be, cognizant of making sure we actually get the supply there. And the proper supports are there. And again, that's where we'd sit down and go through a little bit more of that. And again, we have, like right now, we don't, those vehicles right now that are gas powered are not eligible for the right to repair and often don't have the same information, are challenged right now with getting the proper information for their emissions and for their safety and so forth. The Automotive Association has been pushing this issue quite hard and doing a good job on it. So we have to bring in some expectations too on the industry.
Okay. A question I think will be close to your heart. Do you support the financing of national education? One. Yeah. And two, training programs for citizens, businesses, and employees to help accelerate the transition, especially for training and retraining of employees?
Yeah, so let me tackle that part first and say, absolutely. I used to be an employment specialist for persons with disabilities and youth at risk. And those are incredible opportunities because we're seeing the aftermarket now starting to get some electric vehicles into the actual system that needs to be repaired. And that's one of the reasons we support, keeping incentives for, resale electric vehicles, is because they're going to require different types of skill set opportunities, and they're going to require some attention. And we want to make sure those vehicles just don't end up going into the landfill. There's going to be issues that we want to actually have for training for dealing with batteries. That's going to be critical for safety and also for proper rehabilitation, disposal, and new technologies to deal with some of those elements. So those are things that we would like to see. And again, those are exciting opportunities for young people to be involved.
Yeah, and for maybe for some people who work in the fossil fuel industry right now, who might be looking for a job because it's going to be in decline and they want to train or retrain into another sector, such as renewable energy and electric mobility.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've missed out as a country, and I used to be part of it when we used to have Human Resources Development Canada, there was a little bit more consistency with some of the training programs that were out there. And I think, though, at the same time here, we're going to see some type of a movement to make sure that we're actually across this country. We want to make sure that we have the skilled professionals to deal with the maintenance and operations of electric vehicles of different types, all the way from British Columbia to Newfoundland. That's got to be something that we really need to get our head around and to work towards right away, because if we have a whole bunch of products that are operating, not at 100% or not even operating, there'll be frustrations, there'll be disappointments, there'll be higher costs, and those will dissuade people from moving forward. So again, we're going to have, and we already have enough shortages with some skilled trade professionals, so we have to get assertive on this.
Yeah, we do actually in electric mobility right now. We are really looking after, qualified people, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So just imagine what it's going to be right after this. So does the NDP support adopting electric fleet procurement policy?
Yep, absolutely. And again, these are some things we should be leading with example through our municipal fleets and our provincial and our federal fleets. and showing that they can work and be incentivized. And that's what Canada Post workers want to do. Again, use them as another example. And I think that that's where we can actually have some of the borrowing through the climate bank that we have and others structures to lower the costs as well too, and incentives as well too, to bring them onto line. So fleet vehicle procurement is also good. I mean, look at the fact that, I mean, I know that the minivan here produced in Windsor, I'm biased. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is when you have domestic production that actually has fleet production, it's significant because it actually lowers the cost of the overall vehicles in terms of the sales. And also too, is it also puts that vehicle into the market differently. And it also fills the gap when there could be layoffs from some of the workers and collecting different unemployment insurance or benefits or so forth. When you have a big fleet order that comes in, it significantly stimulates the plant. And that's why we got to get some greenfield battery plants in our country. We have to get some greenfield auto plants. It's been decades since we've had a greenfield plant built here. It's just unacceptable. We got to get our national auto strategy going, especially with this. And I'm 2 miles right now, or 3 kilometers, not quite 3 kilometers, but anyway, from the Detroit border. And we've seen billions of dollars thrown over for investment there. And meanwhile, in Canada, it's around 6 billion over the last several years. And Detroit has been over, I think it's around 12 billion in the last 3 years. I mean, it's just, the renaissance is amazing. And we're really happy for them because it's going to be better for all of us. We're going to get some of that work. But at the same time is that we can't be left behind like this. This is just not acceptable.
Okay. I have a question from one of our members. We're talking about Buy American right now. So one of our members asking, do you have any policy or position regarding, being in favor of a policy on assembly in Canada in the federal program to make sure that Canadian companies are being, are being helped, to make more and more Canadian products in the context of the free trade agreement. So do you have any position on that?
Absolutely. And we want a domestic procurement policy for our fleets that we can and our investments that we can here, including our incentives models. When we're looking at the 15,000, part of the sliding scale will be domestic purchases as well too. We can do that under NAFTA. So just so members are aware, I'm vice chair of the Canada-US Parliament Association. This is the all-party parliament group that lobbies Congress and the Senate on a regular basis. And we've seen actually a diminished capacity since we got outmaneuvered by Mexico for the current agreement as they signed on first. And we had to come scrambling back, changing for environmental and labor laws. And they've still kept with Buy America. They've still kept with softwood lumber. They've kept with a whole number of things. And so he's passed away, is James Oberstar. He was a representative from the Minnesota area. He told me that we should be pushing forward a Buy Canada agenda so that we can actually have a chip to bargain with, to push back on the US and their terms of their strategies here. And so there's certain things that we need to do to stand up for ourselves, but also to foster some of the lowering of costs in Canadian production. Because if we're just going to, again, I mean, I use the Pacific as example in Windsor here, not being eligible for the Canadian incentive from Canadian taxpayers, including the people that actually build the vehicle that are paying taxes, and they're not even eligible for their own government subsidy, but a car made in another country is just totally unacceptable. So we need to look at those types of strengths as opportunities and to challenge the US on that. Quite frankly, our relationship with the US has gone down quite significantly over the last number of years, especially since Gary Dewar left as the ambassador to the United States, because Senate and Congress really respected him. And so we've had to fill a void now. And I think that's one of the things that has to change as well, too, because as things stand.
And we can look at it the other way as well. I don't know if you remember, but 10 years ago, the federal and the Ontario government gave financial support, to assemble electric Toyota RAV4 EVs in Ontario, but we could not have access to them because they were all being sent to California. So, I mean, you could live 2 kilometers away from the plant. You could not buy a vehicle that had been supported by Canadian taxpayers.
That's a great point. Absolutely. And this, so we've got to get our head around this. And that's when, again, we talk about a national auto strategy, but also to a manufacturing strategy, because I don't want to leave it just to be about auto, because there's other electric mobility devices that
like
are
buses and trucks,
buses and trucks and all. Yeah. So I don't want to be, neglectful for those, but that's where we actually have to be having a regular strategy and also maintenance of that strategy by having expectations and continuing to work on those by having the minister. And then again, having a cabinet of climate change is part of this, because it keeps it as a priority and the expectations are there. Great question.
One question from our member. You are saying that you want to create a center of excellence for research and development of ZEVs with hydrogen and batteries and storage. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize for not touching on that. And that would be in conjunction with the university and colleges, and would have to be put out to process. I mean, obviously, I'd like to have that at Windsor, but that's not exclusive to us, because the reality is that this manufacturing and the crossover technologies we have to be respectful that us all can take place in different types of pockets in Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Like, it goes across, because there's so many different things that are happening right now. So that's where we're going to need to have that strong commitment and also have some private partners involved. Again, I've talked about trying to make sure the small, medium-sized companies get SR&ED tax credit support so that they can be part of that. And again, that would be wrapped right into the auto strategy or manufacturing strategy which includes the EV universe, because there's going to be so many connections pieces there. So we want to have that, and then we want to work towards biofuels, and there's other types of battery storage and the reusage are incredible opportunities. We have a lot of smaller companies doing incredible innovation. Same with universities and researchers. But what I found is that the government went to the super cluster model, and I don't even know if people really can figure it out. And so I want something more dedicated to this.
SMEs in particular.
Yes, yeah, and dedicated on this alone. Not dumped into some component of a super cluster that nobody can quite figure out what's going on and who's getting the money and who's not.
Okay. Last question, but not least, from one of our members. You touched on green hydrogen fuel cell technology. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I appreciate these are great questions, because I kind of went back to what's kind of more topical amongst Canadians, but green cell and hydrogen are emerging elements that we can't forget about, because they're going to have connections. And hydrogen too has had quite a colorful history, if I could describe it as that, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to other types of innovations that we've tried. And we've had other models of propane and other types of vehicles and projections about the use of technologies that have also led to other types of innovation. So for ourselves, that's why we would have the Excellence Center, and would make sure that those things are talked a little bit more. And in hydrogen, I'm a big fan of where the investment can happen on this and the returns on it, but it can't be forgotten, because we're moving right now quite solidly just to electrification. But we can't forget that vehicles ironically, the original vehicles were electric. But the oil and gas industry and lobbying moved many, and a lot of different other reasons, moved them to actually gasoline products. I mean, the first vehicles produced in manufacturing for vehicles were electric. And I just don't want us to forget those technologies as well, too. So we have to make sure that they're in part of the equation.
And not to mention the fact that when we're talking transportation, we can be talking about ships and planes as well,
100%, absolutely. So I'm sorry I didn't touch on that as much as I should have, but I mean, that's, again, and we mentioned briefly about the Great Lakes, the fleet renewals that are necessary and so forth. Again, these are incredible opportunities. Because I can tell you, in Windsor, Ontario, we see the ships go by on the Great Lakes, sometimes just spewing like there's no tomorrow. Those lower hanging fruit.
Well, thanks a lot. It was a very interesting conversation. Is there any last thoughts you would like to talk to us about in closing?
I'll just say this. Yeah, thank you for this. I want to thank you for your work. Just consider New Democrats in this election, because with a minority parliament, we get more done. I mean, the reality is that some of the things that you're working towards are significant for our social, economic, and also our planet. And we appreciate that. I'm excited by the technology for it too, but we've seen with a parliament that becomes a majority that, quite frankly, it doesn't get as much done. And we also are a little bit more timid on making risk type of changes to our political way of thinking about getting things done and getting support done. So I just encourage you to consider New Democrats with Jagmeet Singh and our team. We've been, it's similar to Jack Layton, is to be positive, to be professional, to offer solutions, to be open to ways of doing things different. And I want to thank you for taking time to listen and allowing me to participate with you today.
Brian Masse, thank you very much.
Thank you.